prison infirmary is supposed to be the one place inside Whitmore Correctional where nobody can touch you. For inmate Ray Costas, it was a killing ground. A professional poisoner walked those antiseptic halls, carrying a modified insulin pen loaded with enough succinylcholine to stop a man's diaphragm in under 90 seconds. He expected a sedated target and a single indifferent nurse on the overnight shift. He didn't expect Audra Voss. At 1:47 in the morning, the infirmary at Whitmore Correctional Facility existed in the particular stillness that only maximum security institutions ever achieve. Not quiet, exactly, but compressed. The fluorescent overheads buzzed at a frequency that burrowed into your skull after 4 hours. The linoleum floor, washed so many times it had gone from white to the color of old teeth, reflected those lights back in long, watery streaks. The air smelled of bleach and the ghost of institutional food. Audra Voss sat at the central medication station, her reading glasses pushed up onto her forehead, running a pen down the overnight medication log. At 31, Audra was the youngest charge nurse Whitmore had ever hired for the night shift, a fact that the two COs on duty never let her forget. She was slight, brown-haired, the kind of person your eyes moved past in a crowded room. She wore green scrubs 2 sizes too large and kept her ID badge clipped to her collar in a way that made her look perpetually like she was playing dress-up. The correctional officers who rotated through the infirmary called her the little nurse when they thought she couldn't hear them. She had stopped correcting them after the second week. What the COs did not know, what almost nobody at Whitmore knew, was that before Audra Voss had ever set foot inside a correctional facility, she had spent 4 years as a flight medic with the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers. She had kept men breathing in the back of MH-60 Black Hawks in conditions that would make a trauma surgeon's hands shake. She knew the precise window between life and systemic failure the way a carpenter knows the grain of wood. By feel, by instinct, by the kind of knowledge that lives in the fingertips and not the brain. She had left the Army quietly and on her own terms for reasons she didn't discuss. The VA benefits counselor who processed her out had misspelled her name on the discharge paperwork. Nobody had noticed. That was fine. Audra was accustomed to being underestimated. Tonight, her attention was anchored to bed 7 at the far end of the ward. The chart clipped to the footboard listed him as Raymond Costas, 53. Hypertensive diabetic, admitted 2 days ago following a cardiac event during a court transport. The official version. What the chart did not say was that Costas had, until 18 months ago, been the operations director for a financial architecture firm that had been systematically laundering money for 4 separate drug trafficking organizations across the southwestern United States. He had turned federal witness. His testimony before a joint DOJ task force was scheduled for 9 days from now. He had been transferred to Whitmore's medical wing under the assumption that a federal detention facility's infirmary was obscure enough to keep him safe until transport. The assumption was wrong. Costas lay in bed 7 with a cardiac telemetry lead on his chest and an IV line in his left forearm. He was awake, which was unusual at this hour, his eyes fixed on the water-stained ceiling tiles with the particular expression of a man doing the arithmetic on his own survival. Outside the infirmary's reinforced door, Deputy U.S. Marshal Bo Hennessy sat in a molded plastic chair that was approximately 3 inches too narrow for his frame. Hennessy was a competent officer on a bad assignment. Night watch in a prison infirmary was the kind of duty that turned vigilance into complacency by sheer monotony. He was on his second cup of vending machine coffee, scrolling through his phone with his non-dominant hand, his weapon arm propped on his knee in a way that would have made his Academy firearms instructor wince. His partner had gone to the facility's secure communications room to check in with the task force coordinator. 15 minutes, he'd said. That had been 22 minutes ago. The man who stepped off the service elevator on the medical wing's floor at 1:47 a.m. did not look like someone who killed people for money. He looked like what his credentials said he was. A night shift pharmacist from the contracted medical services company that supplied Whitmore's formulary. The badge read Philip Crane, Pharm D. The white coat was pressed. The rolling medication cart he pushed ahead of him was standard issue blue. identical to the one the actual overnight pharmacist used on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He had a clipboard tucked under his arm and the practiced, unhurried walk of a man on a routine delivery. His name was not Philip Crane. The people who had hired him knew him only through an encrypted intermediary. He had been paid $480,000, half before, half on confirmation, to ensure that Raymond Costas did not reach the federal courthouse in Phoenix. The method he had chosen was a modified auto-injector loaded with 200 milligrams of succinylcholine chloride, a paralytic agent used in emergency intubation that, administered in sufficient quantity to a man with an already compromised cardiac history, would produce what the medical examiner would almost certainly classify as sudden respiratory failure, secondary to his documented heart condition. Clean, fast, and deniable, in the way that only biological-looking deaths ever truly were. The correctional facility was, for his purposes, ideal terrain. Rotating staff, bureaucratic silos between the medical wing and the security infrastructure, a culture of deference toward anyone carrying a clipboard and a white coat. He had studied the floor plan for 11 days. He had memorized the pharmacist's delivery schedule, the CO rotation, the nurse's break patterns. He had timed the walk from the service elevator to bed 7 at 43 seconds. He pushed the cart through the infirmary's secondary access door. Not the main entrance, but the supply corridor entrance, which required a key card he had cloned from a badge he'd lifted and returned during a site visit 2 weeks prior, and moved into the ward with the measured confidence of a man who had done this kind of thing in 6 other facilities over the past 9 years and had never once been stopped. Audra looked up. She did it the way she always did. Not a full turn of the head, not anything that would register as scrutiny from across the room, just a lift of the eyes over the rim of her glasses. The night shift had taught her to see without appearing to look. It was a skill she had first learned on the flight line, where situational awareness was the difference between a completed mission and a flag-draped casket. She observed him for approximately 6 seconds. The coat was right. The badge was right. The cart was right. The man's face was pleasant and forgettable in the way that certain professionals cultivate intentionally. But the cart was wrong. Not the cart itself. The cart was standard. It was what was on the cart. Tuesday's pharmacist, Kevin, always ran his delivery with the narcotics lockbox on the lower shelf, the IV fluids stacked on top, and his laptop open on the pull-out tray for the electronic signature capture. This man had the IV fluids on the lower shelf and nothing on the pull-out tray. A small thing, the kind of thing that meant nothing unless you'd signed for 63 medication deliveries from the same service, and deviation, internalize the routine to the point where deviationis registered in your nervous system before it registered in your conscious mind. Audra's nervous system registered it immediately. Her eyes moved to his hands. The right hand was on the cart's push bar. The left was at his side and there was a slight tension in the fingers. Not visible to most people, but visible to someone who had watched combat-stressed soldiers try to appear relaxed. The left hand was ready for something. She didn't move. She didn't reach for the phone. She looked back down at her medication log and said, calmly, to the overnight aide sitting 3 feet away, a young man named Terry, who was working his 2nd week at the facility. "Hey, Terry, do me a favor without looking up. Pull up the pharmacy delivery manifest on the secondary terminal. Tonight's scheduled deliveries." Terry typed. It says Tuesday and Thursday. No delivery scheduled for tonight. Who authorized the cart access? Doesn't show an authorization. Just says, hang on. It says here the delivery credential was swiped at 1:44. Badge registered to Philip Crane. Philip Crane is on approved leave. Audra to this because she had signed the schedule adjustment herself last Friday. The actual Philip Crane was in Scottsdale at his daughter's wedding. He had shown her the invitation. She closed the medication log. The cold that moved through her chest was old and familiar, not fear. The thing that came before fear, the primal recalibration that the body performs in the half-second before action becomes necessary. She had felt it at altitude over the Paktika province with a critically wounded ranger in the back of her aircraft. She had felt it 3 times since returning to civilian life, each time involving a situation where someone had underestimated her. She felt it now. She did not reach for the silent alarm panel. Not yet. The alarm would summon response in an estimated 3 to 5 minutes based on the facility's documented emergency protocols. She had clocked it herself during her orientation. 3 to 5 minutes was a long time. Bed 7 was 40 feet from her station. The man with the wrong cart was 20 feet from bed 7, and moving at a pace that was going to put him bedside in under 30 seconds. She needed a reason to stop him first. She stood up from behind the medication station, smoothing the front of her scrubs, and walked toward him with the particular unhurried authority of someone whose name is on the door. She didn't hurry. Hurrying communicated alarm. An alarm was information she didn't want him to have yet. "Excuse me." She said it pleasantly, stepping into his path at an angle that forced him to slow the cart or run her over. "I'm Audra Voss, charge nurse. I don't have a manifest for tonight's delivery. Can you walk me through what we've got?" The man, she was already not thinking of him as Philip Crane, stopped the cart and produced the clipboard with the ease of someone who had rehearsed the gesture. "Evening. We had a corrected order come through for the patient in bed 7. Formulary adjustment. His attending requested it through the after-hours line." "What attending?" A half-beat, barely perceptible. "Dr. Whitfield." There was no Dr. Whitfield affiliated with Whitmore's medical wing. Audra knew every physician on contract because she had personally reviewed all 14 of their credentialing files during her first month on the job, a habit she'd developed in the Army where a misread credential had once nearly cost a team leader his leg. She kept her expression neutral. "Of course. Can you give me 2 minutes? I want to pull the order from the system before you administer anything. Facility policy for after-hours corrections. It'll only take a second." "Sure," he smiled. Professional. Accommodating. His left hand moved slightly toward the front pocket of his coat. Audra turned back toward the station. She did not go to the terminal. She went to the crash cart. The infirmary's crash cart was positioned 3 feet from the medication station, required by state code to be within reach of any bed in the ward. It was a blue Zoll, stocked per ACLS protocol. Audra had checked and inventoried it herself at the start of every shift for 3 years. She knew where every piece of equipment was without looking. She pulled open the bottom drawer. Behind her, she heard the carts will stop moving. "I'm sorry." His voice had changed. Not dramatically, just enough. The accommodating warmth was gone. "What's the computer say?" "Still loading," Audra said, not turning around. Her hand found the device she was looking for in the bottom drawer, a rigid, battery-powered laryngoscope handle, used for intubation visualization, heavy steel construction, 4 D-cell batteries. It weighed just over a pound. She heard him move. She turned and threw the laryngoscope handle in the same motion. She did not throw it at him. She threw it at the medication cart, hitting the IV bag stack on the lower shelf at center mass. The bags exploded off the cart. Saline and antibiotic solution spraying across the linoleum, and the cart itself lurched sideways, its wheels catching and spinning, the whole assembly crashing into the shelving unit along the near wall with a noise like a car door slamming. The man stumbled backward, startled by the sudden violence of the disruption. "Hennessy!" Audra shouted, not screamed, a command voice, low and sharp, the kind that cuts through noise. "Infirmary! Now!" The reinforced door at the far end of the ward banged open, and the deputy marshal came through it with his hand already on his weapon, his phone clattering to the floor in the hallway behind him. What happened next took less than 4 seconds. The man recovered faster than most people would have. He pulled the modified auto-injector from his coat pocket and lunged toward bed 7, in a single motion, his intent clear. If he couldn't reach Costas covertly, he would reach him directly. Hennessy was still 15 feet away and hadn't yet identified the threat. Audra was closer. She stepped inside his reach. Not away from him, into him, the way she'd been trained in close quarters patient restraint and the way she'd learned, in a very different context, that distance is the enemy when someone is faster than you, and drove the heel of her palm upward into the underside of his wrist, the auto-injector hand. The device discharged sideways into the air between them. The succinylcholine hissing out against the linoleum and the side of the medication cart harmlessly. He was stronger than her. He turned the momentum of her strike into a shove, and she went into the edge of the medication station, with her shoulder and the back of her head hard enough that the fluorescence went briefly white. She did not go down. In the army, there had been a senior medic, a chief warrant officer named Danforth, who had told her once that the most dangerous person in any room is not the strongest or the fastest. It is the one who has already decided, before the situation began, exactly how far they are willing to go. Audra had made that decision a long time ago, in a different country, in a different uniform. She had simply never had occasion to revisit it in a prison infirmary in Arizona. She grabbed the defibrillator lead cable, hanging from the crash cart, thick, coated wire, and looped it once around the man's nearest wrist as he reached again for bed 7, jerking backward with her full body weight. It didn't stop him. It slowed him. It slowed him for the 3 seconds it took Hennessy to close the distance, take the man by the back of the collar and the belt, and drive him face first into the linoleum with a force that rattled the supply shelves. The auto-injector skittered under bed 6. Raymond Costas, who had sat up in bed 7 during the commotion, stared at the scene in front of him with the expression of a man who has had his threat assessment comprehensively revised. Hennessy had the man pinned, one knee in his back, reaching for his cuffs. "You good?" he shouted at Audra without looking up. "I'm good," she said. His wrist. "He's got another device in his left coat pocket. Don't let him reach it." Hennessy adjusted his grip. The man struggled and went still. Audra pressed like the silent alarm panel. Then she pulled on a fresh glove, crouched, and retrieved the discharged auto-injector from the floor, using 2 fingers, and placed it on a sterile field on the cart. Evidence. She would need to document the exact compound for the responding team, so the hazmat protocol was correct. She checked on Costas. His telemetry was spiking from the stress, but the numbers were within range. She adjusted his cardiac lead and checked his IV line, which had not been accessed. "Try to slow your breathing," she told him. "Through your nose if you can. In for 4, out for 4. Costas looked at her. "Who are you?" His voice was rough and not entirely steady. "I'm the charge nurse," Audra said, making a note in the incident log. "I'm going to need you to stay in bed while I handle this." It took 6 minutes for the facility's response team to arrive, followed closely by a second deputy marshal who had been in the communications room and came at a dead sprint when the alarm sounded. 4 minutes after that, 2 FBI field agents arrived, apparently having been monitoring the facility's security feed from a mobile command unit in the parking structure. A fact that Audra would later reflect on with a specific quality of annoyance, because if they had been watching the feed, they had watched the entire sequence of events inside the ward in real time and had still not arrived in time to be useful. The man on the floor was zip-tied and searched. In addition to the auto-injector, the agents recovered a second device in his coat pocket, a small transmitter, not a weapon, which one of the agents identified and bagged without comment. In the breast pocket of his white coat was a folded paper that turned out to be a printed facility map, with bed 7 circled in red ink. Someone had drawn a line from the service elevator to the bed in 4 clean steps. The senior FBI agent, a woman named Castellano, took Audra's statement in the infirmary's supply closet because it was the only private space available. Castellano had the clipped, low-energy demeanor of someone who had processed a great many critical incidents and had stopped finding them remarkable. She asked her questions in a flat sequence and wrote down the answers without visible reaction, until she got to the laryngoscope handle. "You threw a laryngoscope at a medication cart," Castellano said. "Not a question. I needed to knock the cart and create an audible disruption without physically engaging him first," Audra said. "I wanted to slow him and get the marshal's attention at the same time. And before that, you identified him as a threat based on the cart configuration. The narcotics lockbox placement was wrong, and the delivery wasn't on the manifest." Castellano looked at her for a moment. "What did you do before this job?" Audra told her briefly. The Night Stalkers, the flight line, the years she didn't elaborate on. Castellano wrote something in her notebook that she didn't show Audra. Then she said, "We're going to need to move Costas tonight. You'll need to brief the receiving facility's medical team on his current status." I'll have the transfer documentation ready in 20 minutes, Audra said. The agent paused at the closet door. You could have hit the alarm when you first identified the discrepancy. Why didn't you? Because 3 to 5 minutes was too long, Audra said. I checked the response protocol when I was hired. Castellano nodded once, the way people nod when they've heard an answer they already knew but needed confirmed. She left. What came later? The debrief, the statements, the internal facility review, the letter of commendation that Whitmore's warden sent to the state's Department of Corrections was administrative. It was the machinery that institutions build around events they don't know how to categorize. What Audra remembered afterward was this. The particular quality of Raymond Costas's face when she had crouched beside his bed after it was over. The way he'd looked at her, not with gratitude exactly, more with the revised understanding of a man who has spent a long time believing that the people charged with his protection were the ones with badges and weapons and authority, and had just discovered, in the most direct way imaginable, that protection sometimes arrives in green scrubs and says very little. She had checked his IV line. She had adjusted his pillow. She had written her notes in the incident log with the same methodical handwriting she used every night. Deputy Marshal Hennessy found her at the medication station an hour later, finishing the documentation, her glasses back on her forehead, a cold cup of coffee at her elbow. He stood there for a moment, visibly uncertain about what to say. You knew exactly what you were doing, he finally said. Back there. I've had some practice, Audra said, not looking up from the log. Hennessy stood there another moment. Then he picked up his cold coffee from the counter where he'd left it an hour before the whole thing started, looked at it, and set it back down. I'm going to get a fresh one, he said. You want anything from downstairs? I'm fine, Audra said. He nodded and left, and the infirmary went quiet again, just the fluorescent hum and then the telemetry beats from bed 7, steady and regular, counting out the minutes until morning. The infirmary is supposed to be the safest room in a prison. Most of the time, that's a fiction everyone agrees to maintain. That night, it was true. Not because of the badge on the door or the marshal in the hallway, but because the wrong person had walked in and encountered someone who understood in her bones that safety is never a condition. It is a decision, made over and over, by the person willing to stand between a patient and whatever is coming through the door. Audra Voss had 4 hours left on her shift. She turned the page in the log and kept writing.